Hello and welcome everyone to today's What Are My Child's Rights webinar. My name's Donna. I work in the Children, Young People and Families team at Thomas Pocklington Trust, and my role is a family coordinator. Today I'd like to introduce Tom. He's a senior development worker with the Council for Disabled Children. Tom will give an induction to the rights and entitlements vision impaired children have within school, and also provide information about the special education needs and disabilities information, advice and support services. Tom will be answering the questions that have previously been submitted at the end of the presentation. If you do have any other questions, if you would like to ask the questions, and hopefully if we've got enough time at the end, we'll be able to answer these questions for you, or I'll be able to pass them on to Tom. Thank you, Tom, for today, and now I'd like to hand over to you.
Cool. It's lovely to meet everyone. As Donna mentioned, I'm going to go through sort of a high-level presentation on children and young people's rights within education. Hopefully, I'll cover some of what you're all hoping for me to cover today. Obviously, we've only got an hour, so I'll do my best with the time that we've got. And then, if there are any further questions other than the questions that have already been put to us, if you wanted to put them in the Q&A and the or email them afterwards, and I'll do my best to sort of cover anything that I haven't managed to cover today. Let's start off with the ever fun trying to share my screen and make sure that works, and then we can go from there. Donna, can you just let me know whether that's being shared? Everyone can see.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I can see perfectly. Yeah, it's all fine.
Brilliant. All going well so far then. So, as mentioned, I'm Tom Quilter. I'm the Senior Development Worker at the Council for Disabled Children within the Information Advice and Support Service Network. So just a quick brief overview of those bits and pieces if you haven't come across the Information Advice Support Service Network before, or SENDIASS in general, or the Council for Disabled Children. So the Council for Disabled Children are the umbrella organisation for the disabled children sector, and we bring together professionals, practitioners and policy makers. We are part of the National Children's Bureau, who are the charity that work collaboratively across the issues affecting children to influence policies and get services working together to deliver a better childhood. So the idea behind the Council for Disabled Children and the National Children's Bureau is to create sort of professional networks, bringing everyone together to be able to sort of share best practice, be that sort of middleman between services that work directly with children and young people across the board, and those sort of policy makers, decision makers, sort of within government and aside from government as well.
Somebody's just actually put on, sorry to interrupt you, could you describe the slides, which you're doing anyway, but I just want to let that person know that you are describing the slides as well.
Absolutely. The slides are, I'm not creative enough to have anything particularly exciting on the slides. They're basically just the bullet points from what I'm saying, and so there's nothing on the slides that should be missed. So the Information Advice and Support Service Network. So we are funded by the Department for Education to support the work of information advice and support staff, and to monitor and evaluate the work that they do. We support information advice and support services through training resources, tools, direct support, and by managing their communication channels. And we report on their work to the Department for Education and develop a national picture of the work of SENDIASS. So one of the key standards for all information advice and support services, of which there are 152, one in every local authority, is that they must be impartial from their host organisation, whether that is the local authority or if they are outsourced to charity, and even the ones who are outsourced also need to be impartial from their local authority. So the sort of the monitoring and evaluation was decided should be done outside of the local authority. So even though it's the local authority's ultimate responsibility to provide, to make sure that children, young people and families within their local area have the information, advice and support that they are legally entitled to, and the sort of the buck stops with the local authority in terms of that responsibility. In terms of sort of developing training and resources and guidance and support, that comes from us through a contract from the DfE. And so that's sort of how we work and why we exist. And I'll touch back on that later, so don't worry too much. So basically, we're there to sort of make sure that SENDIASS are able to ensure that they are able to deliver the best possible information, advice and support to children and young people in their area, to make sure that children, young people and families within their area are sort of empowered to understand their rights and to be able to sort of challenge when necessary, or to work with the local authority or work with the school, college, social care, health services to sort of understand everything that they are entitled to. And it's supposed to be a bit of a leveler in essence, to make sure that everybody is on the same page, so that children, young people and families know their rights and what they are entitled to, and the responsibilities of those that provide their services, and those that provide the services also sort of understand their rights. Often SENDIASS services will have access to training that local authorities or educational establishments wouldn't have access to, so often they will deliver training to professionals as well, and with the idea to try and make support and services and education sort of more transparent, and to make sure that everybody is aware of their responsibilities and their rights, to ensure that everybody is, you know, getting what they are entitled to. So obviously covering all rights within this presentation is going to be impossible, and trying to get into sort of the more complexities of the law is going to be equally impossible. And so what I've tried to do is to try and sort of, from what I understood sort of was needed, was sort of why this webinar was important, sort of a sort of high level look at sort of the not basic, but sort of high level overview of the right to education and children and young people's rights within education and beyond. And so in actual fact, it is quite simple that all children and young people have a right to education. And that's stated in the Convention of the Rights of the Child, which focuses on a child's right to education and on the quality and content of that education. So Article 28 says that state parties recognise the rights of children to education, and Article 29 focuses on the aims of education. So it's worth starting with that fundamental sort of statement that all children and young people have a right to education. Sorry, let me just move the thing. And so obviously the key word there is all children and young people. So this includes children and young people who need extra support. So it's sort of recognised that children and young people with special educational needs have a right to receive special educational provision in order that they have the opportunity to meet their potential. So this is defined as an educational training provision that is additional to or different from that made generally for others of the same age in mainstream settings. And a lot of these statements, I think, and you'll find this across the board, they seem quite vague, but that's intentional. It's because, you know, essentially, as we'll sort of see later on, the legal tests for, you know, whether or not a child or young person needs special education needs are intentionally vague because they're intentionally low. All children and young people have a right to access education, and if children and young people need additional support within their educational establishment to be able to access the full curriculum of education, then that's what they should have. So the definition of special educational needs, just thinking about that last slide and sort of the bringing in of this idea of special educational needs, again, is quite vague and the bar is quite low. So a child or young person has special educational needs if they have a learning difficulty or a disability, which calls for special educational provision to be made for him or her, in order that they are able to access education and have the opportunity to reach their potential. So if a child or young person has a need that's not being met in school, and that is stopping them from having full access to their education in order that they're able to meet their potential, then that is a special educational need. And so in terms of sort of the definition, so going back to the last slide, it sort of mentions learning difficulties or disabilities that might sort of be the sample for a special educational need. So a child of compulsory school age or a young person has a learning difficulty or disability if he or she has a significantly greater difficulty in learning than the majority of others of the same age, has a disability which prevents or hinders him or her from making use of facilities of a kind generally provided for others of the same age in mainstream schools or mainstream post-16 institutions, and that's a learning difficulty. And a child or young person has a disability if they meet the definition within the Equalities Act, which is you're disabled under the Equalities Act 2010, if you have a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial and long-term negative effect on your ability to do normal daily activities. I mean, it doesn't necessarily help, I think, often that there are words like normal in there in terms of normal daily activities, because that's quite hard to define. Equally, again, they try to keep the bar as low as possible in order that, you know, you can make sure that people can get the support and that they should be entitled to as easily as possible. So that the bars, the legal tests, are intentionally quite low within all of these statements. Which can cause complexity. We can talk more about that later. So in terms of the rights of children and young people with SEND, so all children and young people, as we've mentioned earlier, have a right to be able to access education. Those children and young people with special educational needs or disabilities and or disabilities have a right to have provision sort of change for them in order that they are able to access that provision and to meet their potential. And so the rights that children and young people with SEND have are they have a right to reasonable adjustments and to make sure that they are not at a substantial disadvantage compared to their peers. And they have the right to have discrimination eliminated, equality of opportunity promoted, and good relations fostered between themselves, children and young people without a disability, which should be enabled, for example, by, for example, a school or college. And so a lot of the support starts off with reasonable adjustments, and all of this sort of goes back to the, which I'm sure I hope you've heard before, so the social model of disability, which is all about sort of putting the onus on the service provider or the educational provider to adapt and change in order to meet the needs of those that are attending to, in order that, you know, to go back to that very first right that all children and young people have the right to access education. So if it was we're talking a school or a college, and there's a child or young person there who wasn't meeting their potential due to a special educational need or a disability, then the school have to start off making reasonable adjustments in order to sort of break down those barriers. And again, the onus is on the school to do that. So it's not about the child or young person fitting into the school, it's about the school adjusting for that child or young person. And sort of, again, that child or young person has the right to have discrimination eliminated, equality of opportunity promoted, and good relations fostered. So the school and college, or school or college, have to do all they can to try and sort of ensure that that child or young person has access to educational curriculum and has access to the opportunity to meet their potential just the same as their peers. So how does all this happen? Because it's all sort of very well saying, in principle, all children and young people should have an education. It is the school and college and local authorities' responsibility to make sure that happens. So first of all, reasonable adjustments and sort of the promotion of equality of opportunity should happen firstly through resources already in school, including SEND support. So every school has a certain amount of budget in order to be able to provide reasonable adjustments and to ensure that all children and young people have access to their education. I can't remember the exact figure off the top of my head, and also I think it is something that people try and sort of not try and promote too much. But there are additional resources in school regarding inclusion to try and ensure that all children and young people who attend that school are able to meet their potential and have access to the curriculum. If the child or young person are unable to have their educational needs met through SEND support, this is when a child or young person should have an education, health and care needs assessment. And so this is many of you will be already aware of this. And some of you may be children and young people with an educational, health and care plan, or parents of children and young people with an education, health and care plan. But just to give sort of a brief overview, an education, health and care needs assessment is to consider the needs of the child or young person and to assess if there is a need for an EHC plan. So essentially, if that child or young person is not is struggling in school or college because of their needs. If the school or college is unable to meet that child or young person's needs through the resources they already have in school, then that's when you want to trigger an educational health or care needs assessment to see if that child or young person should be put on an education health or care plan. So the education health care needs assessment. So in order to decide whether or not a child or young person should have an EHC needs assessment, a legal test must be applied. And again, sort of the legal test is intentionally low. So the legal test the LA must consider is whether the child or young person has or may have special educational needs, and whether they may need special educational provision to be made through an education health and care plan. There's a website address on there, and that's for one of our partner organisations, IPSI. They're the ones who deliver our legal training for SENDIASS services, and they're a brilliant organisation. Previously, IPSI stood for Independent Parental Specialist Educational Advice. They've taken that name, and now it's just IPSI. Just in case some of you looked it up, but they are fantastic. They have lots of templates and information on their website that you can sort of find and access all free of charge, and they have sort of phone helplines as well, which, you know, loads and loads of information which they can go through. But yeah, it's worth just sort of going back to this legal test, because it is very low. So if there's ever any conversation with that school or college or your local authority with regards to whether or not one of the key main sort of challenges we find is this refusal to assess. The local authority, school colleges refusing to assess for a education health and care plan. And it's worth reminding them in those situations that the legal test that has to be applied is whether the child or young person has or may have special educational needs. So it's very low. And if you were struggling with that, a refusal to assess within your own sort of personal experience, it is worth having a chat with IPSI, because they have a lot of information on how to challenge that. But should the LA decide to go ahead with the assessment, the education health and care needs assessment, the assessment will determine whether or not the local authority issues a plan based on all the information they gather from the school, parents, the young person, and other relevant professionals. They will inform you of the outcome of the assessment and also your right to appeal the decision. There is a legal process they must follow, including the timescales they must adhere to. And we'll go on to sort of where you can get support from later on in terms of all of these steps. But there is a process they have to follow. There are timescales they have to follow. There are people that they have to contact in terms of getting all the information that they possibly might need in order to determine whether or not that child or young person needs an education, health or care plan. So it is worth, if you are going through this process in order to make sure that your child or young person, or if you are a child or young person, if you are, can make sure you get the support that you need to be able to access education, and then it's worth sort of getting the support in order to go through this process. Unless of course you feel confident doing it otherwise, but because there are all these sort of processes that they must follow. The SENDIASS services that contact the IPSI will be able to walk you through. It just makes sure that you are aware of the local authority educational establishments and responsibilities throughout this process. So an education health or care plan. So if you do go through the educational health and care needs assessment and you do move on to a education health and care plan, an education health and care plan is a legal document that describes a child or young person's special educational needs, health and social care needs, and explains the extra help that will be given to meet those needs and how that help will support the child or young person to achieve what they want in their life. And so this sort of through thread of every child or young person has a right to education, and these are the steps that sort of need to be taken if that child or young person needs extra support within the school in order to be able to access that education and to meet their potential. So those sort of steps are, SEND support in the initial stages. If SEND support isn't meeting that child or young person's needs, it's sort of looking at that education, health or care needs assessment. and then sort of moving on to an education, health and care plan. And all of these processes are there to make sure that children and young people have their right to education supported, to make sure that that child or young person has the support and services that they need to meet their potential. So how to challenge? So again, I assume that a lot of people joining this webinar, as we find often within my role and across the board, that a lot of the time sort of the information that you're looking for is because you've tried to go through these processes and something has happened along the way which has meant that you've become sort of disillusioned with the process, possibly, and sort of looking at how to make, do you feel that there should have been an education, health or needs assessment, or you should have, post the assessment, been moved onto a plan, and that hasn't happened. That's often why sort of people do contact those that can support them to try and sort of get back on track. And so along sort of some of the challenges you may have experienced is whether or not to the local authority deciding whether or not to assess for a plan. So you've asked for an assessment and that's been refused. The decision on whether or not to issue a plan following an assessment, and the contents of the plan, whether or not the plan is fit for purpose, whether that plan, the information in that plan isn't what is needed in order for the child or young person to meet their potential, the right services aren't documented or written into the plan, and whether or not the child or young person is getting support in the plan. So, the education, health and care plan, if it has been issued, is a legal document. If within the plan it says that a child or young person should be getting 10 hours of speech and language therapy a week, then they should be getting 10 hours of speech and language therapy a week, and that has to be a given. And if that support isn't being given, then again, that's something that may need to be challenged. And whether or not the correct process has been followed throughout, whether timescales have been adhered to, whether the local authority and everybody else involved has taken the right steps that they legally have to take in order to sort of make sure that there is process in place for children and young people to get the support that they are legally entitled to in order to meet their potential within education. So in terms of challenging, you have the right to challenge or appeal throughout the process, and this includes everything from sort of challenging through your local authority's complaints procedure all the way through to the SEND tribunal. The local authority must include information about all of this in all their letters. So they must always be telling you how to appeal any decision that's been made throughout, in case you did want to challenge. And there are organisations that can support you throughout, from person-centred support with your SENDIASS to template letters through IPTI. So for special educational needs and disability information, advice and support services are there to support you throughout these processes. There's also IPTI, who I've already mentioned. You have the National Helpline in Contact, and there are other organisations as well, but in terms of where the Department for Education sort of funds, that's those three in particular. So if you did want to contact your local information, advice and support service, you can contact them at any point through their journey. Their job is to provide you with legally based, free, impartial, confidential information, advice and support. They're statutory services operating under strict standards. The standards are created by us, by the Council for Disabled Children, based on the law. As mentioned earlier, the ultimate responsibility for ensuring that children, young people and families within any local authority has access to free, impartial information, advice and support sits within the local authority. So they're the ones that provide the core funding for the SENDIASS service, and we support through sort of developing the standards, as well as providing training, resources, tools, information in order to support services to meet those standards. We also provide top-up funding to services to be able to develop their services to meet their standards, and we work directly when there are sort of challenges within the local area, within between local authorities and SENDIASSes as well. But the services themselves, they're statutory services. They have to work within the law. Children and young people's right to education, to information, advice and support services is within the law. And they have to sort of adhere to those strict standards. I've probably covered a bit of this already, talking about information, advice and support services, but just to sort of give you a bit of an overview of them. So information, advice and support services are teams of varying sizes funded by each of the 152 local authorities that provide information, advice and support to disabled children, young people and those with SEN and their parents. And they must provide information, advice and support through face-to-face meetings, email, a standalone website, social media, email, training and more. Sorry, I've got email in there twice. And they are free, impartial and confidential services. They must be impartial, they must be arm's length from their local authority, they must be impartial. The information that they have to give you has to be based purely on the law, nothing else. They can't take sides, they can't take, all they can do is basically say, this is your right within the law, this is your responsibility within the law, this is the legal process, and that's what they're there to do. So they exist, as mentioned, because of the Children and Families Act 2014, in particular section 32, which a local authority in England must arrange for children and young people for whom it is responsible, and the parents of children and young people for whom it is responsible, to be provided with advice and information about matters relating to the special educational needs of the children or young people concerned. So in terms of sort of where to go with any sort of particular concern, if you feel you're a child or young person, or if you are a child or young person, if you feel you aren't getting what you're legally entitled to get, the support and services you're legally entitled to get in order to meet your potential, it is their job to tell you what you should be legally entitled to get, how to challenge, where to go to challenge, to tell the local authority what their responsibilities are, and just to make sure that everybody is on an even playing field in terms of everybody's rights and responsibilities. And the local authority in England must arrange for children and young people in this area with a disability and the parents of children in this area with a disability to be provided with advice and information about matters relating to the disabilities of the children or young people concerned. Special educational needs and or disabilities information, advice and support services. So this is a animation which I'm not going to try and play because I think it's not quite, I've probably spoken for a little bit longer than I was planning to by this point, just to make sure I can answer any questions and things at the end. But there are lots of animations we have out there, and they are as accessible as we could make them. So they have voiceovers, they have subtitles there, as much as we try to sort of make them as accessible as possible. They're available on our website and our social media. So able to send all of these bits and pieces around later. They're worth having a bit of a look over because they do sort of give you a lot more information about what your SENDIASS service can do, and also importantly what they legally have to do and how they have to work in case that you get to a stage where you need to, or you don't feel like you're getting the support and services that you should be getting from your service. Then also our job is to try and make sure that everybody is then able to challenge their service when necessary, and we're there to do that as well. And to contact your local service, we have information on our website where you can, with all the information in terms of, so you can look up your area, and under each sort of segment you can find where the contact details of your service. You should also be able to contact your service through your local offer website. So it's just a case of typing in whichever area you're in, followed by local offer into any search engine. Your local offer will come up. That should have all the information about support and services available to you in your area, and that will include your SENDIASS service and how to contact them. You can also sign up to social media, so all services have to make sure that they are contactable through social media also, as well as leaflets and referrals. You can also you can phone the National Helpline contact. Will also be able to give you the contact details within your area as well. And so there's lots of different ways that you can find how to contact your local service and how to engage with them, and how to sort of get the information from them that you may need or want to make sure that you sort of have your rights met. So as well as your local offer page, you could also contact your local parent carer forum, who will also be able to sort of point you in the right direction often. And also we have contacts in IPSI. So contacts run the national helpline. So what you have within the contract that DFE sort of give outside of the money that goes straight to SENDIASS, they fund us. They fund the Information Advice and Support Service Network to provide the training services and support for services directly. They also fund Contact, who run a national helpline. So if you didn't feel like you wanted to or needed to contact your local service, you can contact Contact, which is always a bit of a mouthful to say, and they'll be able to sort of answer short queries over the phone. So the difference is you'll be able to sort of chat to them, they'll be able to give you information over the phone, but SENDIASS service will be able to meet with you face to face and be able to support you in a more of a person-centered way. Both are very valuable, depends on the support that you're looking for. But Contact are always there, especially if you feel unable for whatever reason to contact your local SENDIASS service. And we also have IPSI, as I mentioned, who will be able to provide you with information over the phone and direct you to their website and sort of direct you to services should you want. Some more information about SENDIASS services and us can be found to sort of share with anyone as well. It can be found through our website and through videos and through social media, and we also have a newsletter. So if you did want to sort of find out more about SENDIASSes, how to contact your local SENDIASSes, what the minimum standards for SENDIASSes are, how they have to work, how they have to make sure that they present themselves, how they have to make sure they present information, all of that information can be found on the website. We have minimum standards, we have EU READ minimum standards, we have a video on the minimum standards, which sort of goes again through what SENDIASS services have to provide and how they have to provide it and how they have to work and how they have to be managed to make sure they are able to be impartial and arm's length and confidential and to meet their own statutory responsibilities. The videos are quite popular, they're well worth having a look at because they explain it probably better than I can. And we also have social media and newsletters, as I mentioned, which you're more than welcome to sign up to. And so we provide case studies and information and sort of updates on what's happening from a national perspective. So I've gone through that obviously reasonably quickly, because I knew there were quite a few questions and didn't want to sort of go too much into anything. I know that that sort of presenting for 40 minutes on sort of that isn't going to explain everything about children and young people's rights. I've tried to sort of keep it at that level of, everyone has a right to education, has a right to meet their potential, and there are steps in place to ensure that happens, and there are steps in place to challenge if the process to ensure that happens isn't happening. So I hope I've covered that okay. I'll try and answer some of the questions that have been sent, and I can see that a few more have popped up, and I'll sort of do my best to go through that. And if there is anything that I can't cover now, I'm very happy to sort of take those questions away and go from there. I'm going to stop screen sharing. I'll share the presentation as well. I'm going to stop for now because I find it really disconcerting when I'm just looking at a presentation and talking to my laptop. At least when I stop screen sharing, I can see at least myself, so I know that there is another human being somewhere in all of this. So yes, I hope that helped. Now I'm going to go through some of the questions that were sent to me in advance. So the first question was, are leaflets and information about these rights readily available in other languages? Often parents do not have access to the information because they do not speak English. And where can parents go for translations and interpreter, and what efforts are made to proactively inform parents of their rights in languages other than English? So just to say for that one, that there is a responsibility, as sort of we've covered, that all children and young people have a right to this information, this impartial information, advice and support. And so it is down to the local authority and the SENDIASS service to make sure they are working in a way that meets the needs of their population. There is information available in a range of languages. Obviously, in the state of how things are, it's not possible to have every bit of information available in every language with the changing policies, with the changing information that's constantly coming out, and the cost pressures on budgets that is heavy on all services and local authorities. it wouldn't be cost effective to make sure that every piece of information was always translated into every language. However, it is a right to have access to this information, advice and support. So if a language barrier is stopping you from having access to this information, advice and support, then it's down to the SENDIASS service, the local authority within the area, to make sure that that information is presented in a way that meets the needs of the population. So the information is readily, or it's not readily available, but it should be made available to those who need it. Often you find that websites have now got functions with Google Translate and things like that, which I know isn't perfect, and this sort of meets the needs in some way. Centrally, we also collect templates of sort of recurring information in a variety of languages to make sure that we can share that with services, and all services can then access that. So it's one of those, everybody has to do their absolute best. It's not a right in itself, but the right to access information, advice and support is, and therefore then steps must be taken. So the next question was, and I hope I answered that one okay. My son's human rights are being violated by an OT, and I can't get anyone to take responsibility for that lack of support. I would contact your SENDIASS. If you have contacted your SENDIASS and you haven't received the support that you were hoping for, I would have a chat with IPSI or Contact. They'll be able to sort of give you the legally based information that you need, to be able to challenge what's happening and to help you to understand the best steps to challenging it, and sort of the responsibilities of the OT as well. If the person who asked that question would need their contact details and needs it presented in a certain way, let us know. If you email Donna, I can send all those information, all those bits and pieces to Donna in terms of the phone numbers and the email addresses to contact those services. But that's what they're there for, is to give you that legally based information in order that you are able to make sure you get that support. So there was then a couple of questions about a particular SENDIASS service that said that they can provide information and support about education only, but not health and social care for children, young people and their parents. That SENDIASS service has got it wrong. They should be providing education, health and social care information, advice and support, and we can definitely raise that with them. If you'd like to sort of raise it with them yourself, I'm definitely going to look into that. But if anyone else has had this problem with their SENDIASS service, Chapter 2, Code of Practice, 2.1, local authorities must arrange for children with SEN or disabilities for whom they are responsible, and their parents and young people with SEN or disabilities for whom they are responsible, to be provided with information and advice about matters relating to their SEN or disabilities, including matters relating to health and social care. 2.4 of the Code of Practice says information, advice and support should be provided through a dedicated and easily identifiable service. The easily identifiable service, dedicated and easily identifiable service that they are talking about is information, advice and support services. Since the information, advice and support must come from information, advice and support services, and information, advice and support services must then ensure that families are provided with information, advice and support about SEN and disabilities on social care, health and education. So that SENDIASS service has got that wrong. Let them know that if you speak to them, and we will as well. And again, there was another question about a SENDIASS signposting to a external organisation for social care queries. That concerns me equally. I'd like to know more information about that, because they have a duty, they have a statutory responsibility to be providing information, advice and support. Of course, they can't know everything, and if there are other organisations that know a particular thing more, that they can draw on that information, find out the right information, provide you with that information. And if they are referring to organisations that can't provide that information, advice and support, they're not meeting their responsibilities. And so again, that's something that should be challenged and will be challenged. And again, a similar question. I think this was a three-part question around the same service. For health queries, we have to call various medical professionals, which is an exhaustive list, and we are heavily impacted with at work and our well-being. And again, the service should be providing you with the right information, advice, and support. And similarly to the sort of the bits I just mentioned. The second part to that question is our son is 10 years and has profound complex health needs. One of them is severe visual impairment, and for education he relies on hearing a lot. His hearing is very sensitive, hence school use ear defenders, otherwise he puts his index finger over middle finger to close the ear's hearing canal. This impacts his day-to-day education. So we've asked audiology to do an assessment, but they say it's difficult to assess special children with visual impairment and hearing difficulties. We think some special audiology test is required for special children, which current audiologist is unable to refer. Please could you assist in identifying the right level of medical approach for assessment and obtaining a QT MSI, i.e. qualified teacher for multisensory needs for supporters education. And again, this is something that services should be supporting with. And they should be supporting with how to challenge that. And it sounds like, because these questions are all quite close together, I wasn't sure whether they were all from the same person or not. But if they are, it sounds like the relationship with the SENDIASS has been somewhat challenged. The first people to talk to in that situation should be a SENDIASS. If you feel the SENDIASS isn't providing you with the support that they should be, it's worth either raising that with the local authority, because again, they have ultimate responsibility. So if the SENDIASS isn't working in the way that they should be, then they should know that. But also it would be a good idea to contact IPSI or to contact and have a bit of a chat through with the individual, and you'll be able to give them more information at the time, and they should be able to equip you with the tools to be able to challenge and the process in order to be able to challenge in order to get that support that you need, that your son needs, in order to be able to meet his educational potential. The next question was, is there anything you can do to ensure you get trained and experienced support staff in a secondary placement? Our LA have no trained TAs, and we will be looking at recruiting and employing 2 or 3 new TAs to learn Braille after she starts school. So this would be needs-led. So the important thing would be within this would be to, if that child or young person has a education, health and care plan, would be to make sure that in the education, health or care plan, it is stated that your daughter needs experienced TAs who know and can practice Braille in order that she meets her potential, in order that she is able to meet her potential within education. So anything like that where you need a specific service, it's important to get it down to the education, health or care plan. If you don't have an education, health or care plan, it's worth bringing that up with SEND support. If it's not provided through SEND support but is a need, then you can go through the education, health and care needs assessment in order to get a plan, in order to make that need a legal part of that plan. And once it's in the plan, then it has to be provided. So if it is a need, then I'd get it in that plan. The next one is, my son's school said he will not meet the criteria for an EHCP, so we'll not be putting him for one. I'm totally lost as he was only diagnosed at 12 and is now 14. His grades are good and he's not disruptive in class. Does this mean he won't meet the criteria? It doesn't necessarily mean he won't meet the criteria at all. If there is a need in order that he is able to meet his health, his educational potential, regardless of his grades being good, and that's the difficult thing. Like if he is progressing and if he is meeting his potential in school, then it will be challenging to get an education, health or care plan, because that's what they're designed to support. But if his needs are holding him back in any way from achieving his potential, then that should be considered. And again, it goes back to that real low bar legal test of whether or not any HCP needs assessment should be conducted, which is may have additional needs that may need to be met through additional provision. So if there's any sort of ambivalence at all, then that legal test should help you in order to sort of challenge to have that educational, health and care needs assessment. which it sounds like you haven't gone through that process. So it sounds like that's at that refusal to assess stage. There are also, again, on IPSE's website, there are template letters you can fill out to challenge the refusal to assess. Also, your SENDIASS will be able to support you through that process, and you have contact as well. So there is a way to challenge and to try and get onto that education, health and care needs assessment, if you think that there is a need, and then to go from there. As we've been talking, I've been going through the questions I've sent to me before. I've noticed we've got 18 questions on the chat, which is great to know that everyone's sort of engaged, but I've only got 15 minutes left, I think, so I will do my best, and anything I don't get to, I will go back through later on, if that's okay with everyone.
Thank you, Tom, that's brilliant.
So first question, who is it that performs EHC needs assessment? So that will be an ECHO. So I mean, they're called different. Sorry, I think that question just disappeared. I'll go back to it. And so who provides it? Is it the local authority will have a dedicated team who have to undertake it. They have to go through a sort of process in terms of who they contact. So they have to contact everybody involved in the child or young person. So if they've got OT, they have to contact them. Teachers, obviously, parents, of course, hearing the child or young person's voice, and then anybody else who is important to have involved. So there'll be a dedicated team within the local authority. ECHOs are what they were called in the last local authority I worked at, which was educational health and care plan coordinators, assessment coordinators. That doesn't spell ECHOs, something like that. So yeah, so they're the ones who do that. Next question I've got on the top of the list, which I assume is in time order. I haven't done a question and answer on Zoom before, like I was saying at the beginning of the meeting to Donna, that we mostly use Teams in our organisation. But so the next open question I've got is, I'm an educational advocate for a Sussex-based charity supporting young people with vision impairment. Our biggest problem at the moment is the number of clients we have with the HCPs who are not receiving the level of provision set out in their plans. The schools say they cannot afford it. Local authorities say they must. The pupils are stuck in the middle. We have increasing numbers not attending schools. They're struggling so much. Any thoughts? Lots of thoughts. I've got so many thoughts about that. The schools legally have to provide it. So the local authority are right, and they must. The education, health and care plan is a legal document. If the school is not providing that support, they're breaking the law. But it's also true that some schools and other institutions don't have the money in order to be able to meet that, which is a bigger issue. The SEND review is happening this year, which is quite focused on that. I guess all we can do really is keep feeding into the SEND review to point out repeatedly to those in charge of the budget at the very top, that we've created this incredible set of reforms, the 2014 reforms, but we've put it in a way that a lot of places are saying they can't afford to meet their own legal and statutory responsibilities, which is a very sad thing to say. But ultimately, the SEND review is looking at that and looking at the challenges that's created, and hopefully the answer will be, let's find some more money for the SEND system. That's ultimately what's needed above anything else. But yeah, otherwise, all I can say to that is the school legally needs to be, but they don't have the money as much as you'd like them to meet, or they have to meet all their legal responsibilities. So yeah, I can imagine that's incredibly frustrating. So next question I've got is, my daughter is 13 and in year 8 at a selected grammar school. She is registered blind and has a diagnosis, which I'm not going to try and pronounce, neonatal abstinence syndrome and CVI. I'm told by her QTVI that I will struggle to get an EHCP. She doesn't have one, and she will be considered to be a bright girl who is achieving well. However, she struggles massively with her organisational skills, which obviously impacts her learning and her school experiences. Is it right she wouldn't get an EHCP easily? I wouldn't be able to comment on whether she would be able to get one easily or not. But fundamentally, if her needs aren't being met fully, just because someone's doing well which is why we always use the words to meet their potential rather than just doing well, because I think, you know, setting the bar at the level it should be. And if there is a need, an unmet need, which is holding her back in any way, then those needs should be met either through SEND support or through an education, health and care plan if the school doesn't have the right resources in place to provide that SEND support. And you are able and fully within your rights to challenge and to request an EHC needs assessment to explore that fully. And I mean, it's worth going through the EHC needs assessment and then deciding, you know, whether or not you agree with the decision post it. But there's nothing stopping you from kicking that assessment off and going from there. Is the assessment only done on the needs at that time, or can it be anticipating future needs, e.g. transition from primary to secondary school where needs may be different? It would be done at the time, but considering the fact that that child or young person may have needs that may be internal, it depends on what those needs were, so it's quite difficult to say. But if you knew that that child or young person had particular transition needs that would be causing anxiety, which may impact education at the time, which may impact your transition planning, all of those sorts of bits and pieces, then that would be taken into account. You can always reapply for an education needs assessment. I should know the timescales off the top of my head, but I don't. But it's worth exploring that. So maybe the best thing to do with that situation would be to have a chat with your SENDIASS, sort of lay out your child or young person's needs, and then make a decision whether you feel that it would be the best time now, or whether down the line would be the better time to begin that process. The average waiting times for IAS support is varies hugely, and the thing about IAS services are they themselves vary hugely. In terms of increase in parents seeking more support due to COVID issues, it's been a huge range. Some services have found they've had a lot less requests for support because children and young people's needs are often being met quite well at home, because a lot of children and young people who may want to access support from SENDIASS services may have the needs, their equipment, their support, the familiarity of home, and they found that that's actually been, well, I mean, it's not right, and obviously the education establishments are often the best place for children and young people to grow, to develop, but in terms of sort of actually needing to challenge, because so much of the challenge is we're not getting the support that we need. Well, at home we are, so they're not having that fight at the time. But on the other end of the spectrum, there have been lots of situations where SENDIASS services themselves have had their capacity impacted by being off work, looking after vulnerable family members themselves, homeschooling, so they've had reduced capacity. And then in those summer areas, there has been an increase in parents seeking support, and that has all impacted. I don't know what the average waiting times are for support, but in most of my experience is quite quick, as compared to others. And if you're finding that there is an issue, as mentioned, there's always contact helpline, which is a lot easier to get through to because they're always manning that phone line. And also, SENDIASS services should have a range of ways of contacting them as well, in terms of phone, email, all those things. You can try giving them a call often is the best way to get through, and then to sort of ask that question for them. Is there a different process for private education? In terms of sort of, I'd need to know a little bit more information about which process you mean for that. Educational establishments do differ, and if that person would happily email, I'm happy to to give me a little bit more information via email. I'm happy to try and give you some more information. Otherwise, have a chat with your SENDIASS service. So it depends on which part of the process you mean. It gets a little bit more complicated in terms of sort of who can be involved in things. But I mean, the right for a child or young person to have an education stays exactly the same, and the right to have support in order to meet that stays exactly the same. It's just more about where the funding comes from. If the child or young person has an education, health and care plan, will they need another one when they go to college? If you mean sort of college, sort of post 16, then no, education, health and care plan can go up to 25 while you're in full-time compulsory education. Going into uni, you wouldn't have one post that, so it would leave when you left that sort of compulsory education bracket. How likely are you to get an education, health and care plan based only on speech and language and social emotional difficulties when a child is academically able? If the social education, the speech and language and social emotional difficulties is impacting that child or young person's ability to access their education and to meet their potential, then you can get an education, health or care plan. It's not just about academia. I mentioned in one of the earlier slides that it's also a right to sort of be able to access the institutions around education as well. You can get an education, health and care plan based on any needs, any SEN, any disability, if that SEN or disability is impacting your education and isn't being met through SEND support.
We best actually stop. We're on 11 minutes past.
Oh, sorry, I was doing my best to try and get through them.
I know, I could tell. And thank you very much for today, Tom, and for trying to get through all the questions. The questions we haven't been able to get through to, I can forward on, or we can forward on to Tom, and he can either forward them back to me and I'll pass them on to the people that have asked the questions. I've really found the webinar interested, and I'm sure all the parents of attending today. Thank you for all your knowledge. It's fantastic how much knowledge you've got there, and thank you to everyone else for attending this evening's webinar. Just before we go, I'd like to remind you that the next webinar will be on the 15th of April. This will be in more depth in certain areas, so we'll pick some areas out and we'll be able to go into more depth in the hour that we've got then. So please register for the next webinar on the Children, Young People and Families page on Thomas Pocklington Trust. Any problems, my email has actually been put on there. Please email me, don't hesitate not to email me, and we'll do our best to answer the questions that we've received today. So thank you once again, Tom. Thank you to everybody that's attended. I hope you all have a good evening, a good weekend. Take care, and hope to speak to you on the next webinar. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks for having me. Nice to see you all.
Yeah, you can take a break now, Tom. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.